Help us reach 1,000 subscribers. I have always loved driving at night. There is something soothing about the silence of empty roads with only the headlights illuminating the way. But after that night, I never traveled alone on deserted roads again. It was supposed to be a short trip, a simple route between two neighboring cities. But the fog changed everything. I left too late. Work dragged on, and when I finally hit the road, it was already past 10 p.m. I chose a shorter but less busy route to get there faster. The weather forecast didn't warn of fog, but after half an hour of driving, it suddenly appeared. At first, it seemed harmless, just a thin layer covering the fields around me. But as I continued, the fog became denser until I could barely see a few meters ahead. I slowed down, focusing only on the white line beside the road. The road seemed endless. No other cars passed me, and the streetlights were rare and dim. That's when I began to notice something strange. The first signs were subtle. I thought I was just tired. A shadow at the roadside, which disappeared as soon as I passed. Something that looked like a volcano among the trees, but vanished with the fog. The feeling of being watched grew with each mile. I knew I was alone, but I couldn't shake the impression that there was something out there hidden in the fog. Then I saw it. A car parked on the shoulder, with its lights blinking. I slowed down, thinking of stopping to help, but something made me hesitate. There was no one inside. I looked around, but the fog was so thick that I couldn't see beyond a few meters. I decided to move on, but minutes later the same car appeared again. It was parked on the shoulder, identical to the one before. My heart raced. It didn't make sense. I hadn't made any turns and the road was straight. How could it be the same car? I thought about turning back, but the fear of getting more lost in the fog kept me going forward. I turned on the GPS, but the signal was out of range. The fog seemed thicker, almost solid. That's when I noticed another detail, the white line beside the distant road. I no longer knew if I was on the road or on some detour. I began to sweat despite the cold. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw lights, headlights, another car, but the headlights weren't moving. They were stationary, as if the vehicle was silently following me. I sped up, trying to leave the car behind, but every time I looked in the rearview mirror, it was still there, exactly the same distance away. Suddenly, I saw a silhouette in the road. I slammed on the brakes, making the tires skid on the wet asphalt. When I pointed the headlights forward, there was nothing there, just the fog moving slowly, as if it had a life of its own. That's when I heard the first sound, a light tapping on the side of the car, as if something had touched the door. I looked at the glass, but there was nothing. Another sound, now on the passenger window. I pulled the locks and accelerated again, but the continuous noise, as if something was scratching the car. Finally, I saw lights ahead, a gas station. When I parked, trembling, the car looked normal. No marks, no scars. I rushed into the convenience store, and the clerk looked at me as if I were crazy. "Are you okay?" he said. I tried to explain what had happened, but he just shook his head. "You're not the first to stop here with that story." I stayed there for another hour until the fog began to dissipate. When I returned to the car, I looked back down the road. The fog moved slowly, as if it were alive, and for a brief moment, I swear I saw the same silhouette standing among the trees. Never drive alone at night again. Some roads are not meant to be traveled in silence. Report 2. I have always enjoyed driving at night. The empty roads and silence have always been relaxing for me. At least, that was the case before that trip. It was supposed to be just a quick drive, but an unexpected fog turned everything into a nightmare that I could never forget. I had left work late and needed to take a road to visit my sister in a nearby town. I had made that trip several times before, and I had never had any problems. Shortly after leaving the main highway, the fog began to roll in. At first, it was light, but within minutes, It became so dense that the headlights barely illuminated the road. I slowed down and kept my eyes fixed on the white line next to the asphalt. Everything seemed normal until I noticed that the line had disappeared. I decelerated and looked around. Dense trees covered both sides of the road. The fog made it seem like I was completely isolated. I continued driving, but the road felt narrower. I began to feel as if I were driving in circles. That's when I saw something beside the road. A car parked on the shoulder with its hazard lights on. I slowed down, thinking about stopping, but as I got closer, I realized there was no one inside. A chill ran down my spine. I decided to keep going, but after a few minutes, the same car appeared again. I stopped in the middle of the road, trying to understand what was happening. I turned on the GPS, but there was no signal. My cell phone also didn't work. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw headlights behind me. For a moment, I felt a sense of relief. Finally, someone else on the road. But the headlights didn't move. They remained stationary, shining through the fog like two fixed eyes. I accelerated, but after a few kilometers, they were still there, always the same distance away. That's when I heard it. A faint scratching on the side of the car, like nails scraping against metal. I stopped the car abruptly and looked around. Nothing. The road was empty, shrouded in thick fog. When I started driving again, the continuous sound was back. Now it seemed to come from different directions, as if something was circling the vehicle. The fog felt denser, almost alive. That's when I saw a silhouette ahead. It was standing in the middle of the road, motionless. I honked, but the figure didn't move. When I tried to swerve around it, it disappeared into the fog. My eyes went back to the rearview mirror, and for a second, I saw something behind the car. I accelerated without looking back. After a few minutes, I finally spotted lights. A small gas station in the distance. When I stopped, the attendant looked at me with a strange expression. I asked if he knew anything about the road. He hesitated before answering. A lot of people get lost around here. Some never come back. I looked at the car and felt a chill. There were deep scratches on the passenger door. I never drove that road again. Some places shouldn't be crossed, especially when the fog rolls in. Report 3. I have always been skeptical. I never believed in ghosts, hauntings, or anything supernatural. But one night, I found myself trapped in a house that seemed to breathe. And since then, I can no longer ignore what I felt inside. It all started when I accepted the invitation to take care of a property in the countryside. The owner traveled and asked me to keep an eye on things. I didn't know that would be the worst decision of my life. A house built in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by fields and tall trees. It was an old 2-story building with large windows and a porch that creaked in the wind. I arrived a little before sunset. The place seemed abandoned, but the interior was in good condition. The owner had provided basic instructions and assured me there was nothing to worry about. The first hour was calm. I made some coffee, explored the rooms, and settled in the living room with my book. But as night fell, the atmosphere began to change. The silence in the house was oppressive. The wood creaked, and the wind made the windows rattle. I tried to ignore it and keep reading, but something felt wrong. That's when I heard it. Upstairs, a low sound, like footsteps. I put the book aside and stayed silent, waiting to hear it again. The footsteps continued, slow and spaced out. I slowly climbed the stairs, holding a flashlight. The hallway was dark, and every door was closed except one. The dim light from the hallway barely illuminated the interior of the open room. I entered and saw it was an old guest room. The bed was made, but there were marks on the floor, as if the furniture had been dragged recently. As I examined the room, I felt a chill. The sound returned, now closer. It was as if someone was standing behind me. I turned quickly, but the hallway was empty. My heart raced as the bedroom door slammed shut, trapping me inside. The flashlight flickered, casting shadows that did not move. That's when I heard a message. I couldn't understand the words, but it came from the corner of the room. I illuminated the direction of the sound and saw something that made my blood run cold, a mirror covered by an old cloth. The sound seemed to come from behind it. With trembling hands, I removed the cloth. The reflection showed the empty room. But for a moment, I saw a shadow in the mirror that wasn't in the room. Desperate, I tried to open the door, but it felt locked. The sound grew louder, now more intense, as if several voices were speaking at once. Finally, I managed to open the door and ran down the stairs. But as I descended, something behind me, quick footsteps, as if someone was chasing me. When I reached the living room, the front door was also closed. My fingers trembled as I tried to unlock it, but the key turned uselessly. That's when I saw it through the window. In the yard, a figure standing in the darkness, watching me. I don't know how, but I managed to open the door and run to the car. When I looked back, the figure was no longer there. The next morning, I returned to get my things. I found the house empty, but there were handprints on the walls, as if someone had scratched them. I never told this story to the owner, and to this day I avoid passing that road. Some places hold secrets that should not be disturbed.